Heron. You're here in Rockport, Washington now, and I'm wondering if you can tell a story about how a woman from New Jersey ended up in the Skagit Valley in the first place.
I can do that. So I grew up in New Jersey in the 60s and 70s as it was becoming ever more suburban and urban. And I had good friends that lived in Manhattan. I spent a lot of time in Manhattan in my later teen years and just happened to have a few too many acts of violence happen against me. I got mugged twice. I got robbed coming out of the subway. I got my windshield smashed. I got my car broken into 4 or 5 times.
Wow.
It just was too much of a personal attack again and again and again. And my sister had been living in rural Vermont, and I was going to the Ag College at Rutgers way back when gas was 27 cents a gallon. It was nothing to take off for Vermont for the weekend, and I spent a lot of time visiting my sister in Vermont. I had family all over New England, and my dad had lived in rural Pennsylvania for a while, so we had left the suburbs for a few summers to live closer to his work. And I started spending more time in rural places, and even in my high school yearbook, my quote was, "I will leave this place someday and go live in a rural place." So when people that I was visiting with in Vermont were one more time tired of listening to me complain about my life in New Jersey, somebody one day said, "Well, why don't you move someplace you don't have to leave all the time?" And I think I was 20. I was 21. I had just turned 21. And even though I had a full ride to the Ag College at Rutgers, the idea of getting out just clicked on. And I quit my job, and I contacted the registrar at Rutgers and said, "Can you hold my scholarship for me?" And I packed my bags and I left.
Wow.
I just
left.
Just left. And I had relatives in California. I was trying to get into veterinary medicine. And there's a vet school at UC Davis. And I had some good friends that graduated from the forestry department at Rutgers that had found work here in the Skagit Valley after they graduated. And I had friends, you know, from high school and that were going to colleges at different places across the country. And I had a little Toyota, and I filled it with all my earthly possessions. So I started traveling, and I had a wonderful 6 weeks kind of cruising across the United States, visiting people, going to national parks. And I thought Wyoming was pretty special. I really almost got caught in Wyoming. And there's a vet school in Colorado, so that could have worked. But I kept coming, and I hit the Skagit Valley in the middle of August of 1975. And it was like the red carpet got rolled out. My first day in Sedro-Woolley, I needed a pair of sneakers. And I was walking down Main Street. Okay, come on, guys. I was walking down Main Street, and I'm kind of distracted by my horse.
That's
I was
okay.
walking down Main Street, and there was a shoe store there, and the owner of the shoe store was sitting out front. His name was Doc. And as I walked up to him, he goes, "You look like you're new in town. Would you like a cup of coffee?" I'm fresh out of New Jersey with all this trauma that had happened. And I said, yeah, I want a cup of coffee and a pair of sneakers too. It just worked. Everything just happened easily. I got a job, I got a great place to live. I wound up working for this really cool veterinarian in Mount Vernon and got my in-state residency. Applied to WSU, and I had really good transcripts from Rutgers, so I had no problem getting into WSU. And then I moved over to Pullman. I did not get into vet school because way back then they would let 8 students out of the 80 split seats get into vet. 8 women were accepted into the vet school back in the 70s, and I wasn't one of them. And I was working for a vet who was on the admissions board, who practiced over in Moscow, Idaho. And after 3 years of applying, I had worked for him for a year and a half, and I had the grades. And he finally said, Ann, they're never going to let you in. I'm not supposed to tell you this, but your parents didn't pay taxes here for 30 years. It doesn't matter that you're a resident. You'll never get in. I got involved with folks that were starting the Pullman and the Moscow food co-ops and starting to contract with organic farmers. So the more I learned about food and how food is grown and how it was affecting people and communities, and I was in college during the Russian wheat embargo when Earl Butz was the Secretary of Ag. You know, saying get bigger, get out, plow out all the fence rows. Going to school in the Palouse, it's hard to stay apathetic about some of the true costs of our food production, because back in the 70s, the soil erosion was just incredible.
I don't remember
wheat
that.
Growing was resulting in 40 to 60 tons of topsoil washing out from these Palouse fields every single year. You know, and they're all saying monoculture, monoculture, ship overseas. It's all about trade, it's all about commodities. And meanwhile, you know, you're looking at 150 feet of soil erosion coming off these Palouse hills where hundreds of feet just drop down. Just the whole, and the roads fill up with soil, and they're out there plowing the roads to get the soil off it. That's how much erosion there is.
That's incredible.
You know, it was just like, you know, this is not sustainable, folks. You know, and having been participating with Earth Day and starting to really question everything they were trying to feed us, it was a natural to be more interested in organics and a different way. And looking at the structure of agriculture just became a real passion that I've never given up. At that point, I still didn't know that I was going to farm. But I left Pullman, and my sweetheart and I rented a little place in Concrete, and I went to work for a dairy farm in Cedro Woolley. Wonderful, wonderful man. I learned so much working for him. And I did a lot for him because I had a really strong background in dairy science. And so I worked for John for a year, John Maurer, and then met the folks that were doing Cascadian Farm, and there was a bunch of issues that happened at the dairy. But by then I had discovered that I really loved farming. I loved working on the dairy. I loved being around the cows. I really enjoyed learning how to operate equipment. I I was good at kind of, you know, being with the livestock, dealing with the equipment, with trucks and tractors, and so he just kept teaching me stuff. And then when I came to the folks at Cascadian Farm, I was the only one that had an ag background, and I had operated a lot of kinds of large equipment. So
tractors.
Yeah, tractors and big trucks, and you know, I had hauled silage and, you know, learned how to drive a semi and learned how to drive, you know, big rigs. And so I fit into what they were trying to do at Cascadian Farm really well. And the guy that started Cascadian Farm was very involved with TILF Producers Cooperative, the first organic farm organization in Washington, and I started getting involved with it. And it was, you know, kind of this natural thing of, these are the people that are trying to change agriculture. And especially as we were, you know, I learned how to working at Cascadian Farm. I probably knew how to work before I got there, but he says the flies are bugging me.
I love that horse, by the way.
His name is Buddy, and he's a big sweetie pie.
Buddy.
He's a big sweetie pie. He says, "Oh, do you love me too?"
Oh, look at you, horsies.
Labs doing things that basically tell industry how to make the animals suffer even more than they already are for the sake of profit, and it was completely not okay. I became a vegetarian when I was in animal sciences. With hogs and chickens, torture them until just make them more and more confined, feed them meat and bone meal, cut off their beaks so they can't chew on each other, lock the sows so they can never turn around and move. Just, you know, the more horrible things you can do to pigs and chickens, it all made them more money. But if they tortured cows, the cows don't give more milk, so they have to treat cows better.
You're interested in agriculture even when you were on the East Coast.
Yeah. But I didn't really know it. You know, I was interested in being a veterinarian. And I was interested in doing large animal veterinary medicine. I wasn't interested in just doing cats and dogs. I had always been around horses. And I had done a little side study of goats. And I was interested in livestock. So I saw myself pursuing large animal vet med. I didn't see myself pursuing small animal vet med at the time.
Okay, so that was
So it was really my time in Pullman and the Skagit that started getting me more interested in agriculture issues. And then, yeah, actually what triggered it was my good friend Woody Derricks, who farms just down the road and has been involved with the organic movement for a long, long time. He was teaching a free university class at WSU based on a book called Radical Agriculture. And that was really my first introduction to thinking about our food system. I started reading more and more and started getting more and more interested in how food comes to us. And then when I came to Cascadian Farm and met Jean Kahn, who was really quite an amazing person, and started coming to TILF meetings, I was meeting people that believed in doing it differently and were building their own farms and working just as hard as I was. And, you know, it was hard for young whippersnappers like me, like, you know, everybody in the early days, to, you know, relate to people like Steve Sakuma. You know, we didn't really have a context for working with people in conventional agriculture. We were really off on our own. They thought we were nuts. Why would anybody do this? It's so hard to grow crops and make any money as it is. Why would you not use all the tools at your disposal? So in the early days, it was a very important thing to have access to a community that was operating from a similar paradigm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
Yeah. So these tilth meetings were incredibly important psychically. And, you know, it was meeting your tribe. It was meeting people that were learning how to do it different, that were being the experimenting and taking the risk of trying to figure out a different way to grow food. And over the course of a number of crop failures, I came to understand that we really were the guinea pigs. And it was so much easier for us that were just renting land or, you know, coming in without a whole family generational expectations of how things get done. Years ago, we had a really wet spring and it had flooded the previous winter. This land that I farm all can flood. And I had a half an acre of raspberries, which, you know, for a grower like me is a fair amount of land. This whole piece that I farm right here is about 4 acres. And
This whole section?
the whole thing. So this area here, from the fence to those trees, is probably about an acre. And so I had about half of this in raspberries, and it had been really wet. But, you know, they were growing fine. And it was kind of a spring like this one. And right about when harvest was getting going, which is around July 4th, the sun came out, the field was full of fruit, and I walked out the day before I was going to harvest to set things up, and I started noticing that some plants were wilting, and I came back the next morning and half the field was dead.
Whoa.
And I came back the next day and the rest of the field was dead. So basically in 48 hours, I went from having a bumper crop of raspberries to a half an acre of dead plants. And it was a very humbling experience for me to go, oh, well, what if this had been 40 acres? And what if this was a third or a fourth generation farm? They can't afford to lose this, you know, and I'm not going to spray the fungicide that I would need to have sprayed to save this land. If I was smarter, I could have anticipated that 3 days underwater during the flood might have brought in root rot, but I was pretty ignorant. And watching that effort of those years of establishing that field and all the pruning and the weeding and the fertilizing, and now it's all gone, almost overnight. It was a very, very humbling experience.
I was going to ask what that does to your psyche as just a human being working so hard on it, and as a
It
farmer.
certainly makes me respect what conventional growers have to do to survive. It's interesting, you talk about the person. I'm a middle kid in a family of 3. In a dysfunctional family, you know, parents got divorced after I graduated from high school. And I spent a good chunk of my growing up time trying to be the go-between for non-communicative parents. So my formative years were spent listening to people and trying to bring them together. And I found that I had a real strong interest in trying to get people of different persuasions to listen to each other. And it has totally guided the boards that I sit on and the work that I do in trying to change agriculture. I mean, I believe we have to change agriculture. I think we're in deep trouble. I don't think our food system is sustainable. I think it's destroying our rural communities, And as I found my place in this community, as I found my place in a rural community, what I realized was I have to live in a rural place. You know, I grew up in a suburban place, rapidly urbanizing, and I'm just so much better in a rural place. It doesn't really matter who my neighbors are, because everybody, if you help everybody, everybody helps you, you know. It's just, we are isolated, and it doesn't matter what politics are. You befriend your neighbors, you work with your neighbors, and you know, maybe occasionally you talk politics, but you probably try to avoid it most of the time. But when there's a flood or a snowstorm or whatever,
every man's equal.
You know, everybody
every person's
comes out
equal.
and helps each other, and that's how I wanted to live. And the more I learned about the structure of agriculture and how, you know, the whole corporate control was changing everything, and how our food and ag policy was changing who could farm and what the economics were like, I was realizing that what I needed, i.e. a functional rural living, was very much in danger of disappearing forever. And so it certainly motivated me to do a tremendous amount of my volunteer work in my life. And I never had children, and that was by choice, because I was really much more obsessed about the issues around agriculture and devoting my life to that. Unfortunately, I have a partner that supported that. And my husband is now the volunteer coordinator for the North Cascades National Park, and he's bringing kids of color from urban areas out to the park, and doing all these work projects, and bringing
That's spectacular.
kids from all over the world out there. You know, it's really, really cool what Mike is doing.
Wow.
So Mike tries to not have too much to do with the farm. He started the nursery business with another buddy. My husband graduated with a degree in forestry, and he and another buddy started the nursery. And the nursery was really good to us for a long time, but he also wound up starting the native plant nursery for the North Cascades National Park. And we had a business partner for a while, a former intern, who stayed with us for a decade, and we made him a partner. And it was good to grow the nursery for him. But when he got married and started having a family, he kind of wanted to go on his own. And Michael didn't want to deal with two nurseries. And my passion is really much more about food. And my body is really done doing heavy-duty nursery work. And it was too hard to find people upriver that wanted to do that kind of work. We did it for a long time, and we're still dibbling and dallying in the nursery world, but it's not my passion.
That's predominantly bamboo?
Yeah, and we did a lot of native plants too. And I'll probably always play with some native plants. And as I get away from vegetables, I might kind of get back into some stuff, but my passion is food. And that's what I've been focusing on. So we still have our hands in the bamboo world, because we have 160 kinds of bamboo. It'll be hard ever to not be in the bamboo world. And we sold nursery stock for so long, our name is out there. But
isn't it hard to stop growing bamboo once you start growing it?
It is hard to stop growing bamboo once you start growing it. In fact, it is, yes. So we'll always have bamboo, and you know, we're going to have a little more challenge managing it and maintaining it as we get older. But it is a very cool plant, and it's hard not to, you know, kind of get addicted to it. It's pretty amazing. You know, we eat it and we sell the poles, and we see ourselves in our retirement years making bamboo things out of all the fun bamboo we have. So we're trying to get our shop ready for that. You know, it's definitely been about feeding our passions, and because I was pre-vet in college and I had a lot of medical background, Michael had become an EMT with concrete before I moved over here, and it seemed like a really cool thing to do, that because we could do it together and I wouldn't lose all my medical stuff. I had been doing veterinary quack work, on the side up here for a long time. I did it for a while. And it was just a great way to be a newcomer up here and gain immediate respect and help and admiration. It was a wonderful thing to do. And
for you personally,
yeah,
to make you feel good.
Yeah, and back in the day, when we first came here, there was a lot of people like us, educated urban refugees, came from all over the country, and a lot of them became EMTs. So it kind of became a thing to do in my bigger circle of peers. And we go to a party and
I never thought of it that way.
And there's 6 paramedics and 15 EMTs and 3 nurses and a respiratory therapist. And I think that the children of the 60s, the hippies, whatever you want to call it, the people that did the Back to the Land movement were looking to figure out right livelihood. And medicine is one way to do right livelihood, to do good in the world and do no harm, reduce the harm. And I think that's why, as I've considered other careers when I had bad farming years, I've often thought about, should I go back to nursing, should I go back to school, should I do nursing school, and I never have, but I've met a number of nurses that thought about becoming farmers and a number of farmers that have become nurses. So I think that there is something in
caregiving, the person or the
nurturing, or I think there's some piece there that is more universal than just me. We managed to get ourselves a new chief for the fire department a couple years ago, born and raised on this street. And his family barn burnt down when he was a kid. And Mike and I, with a couple of other people, came zooming in, and at that moment he decided, just like we did when we were younger, I had a house fire when I was in high school, and that certainly set me up for wanting to give back. And this young man has just done an amazing job, and he got all of his neighbors to join the fire department, and many of them born and raised on this street. And we now have a completely functioning, full roster fire department, which for rural areas is almost unheard of. We have 5 new EMTs, 8 new completely trained firefighters. We're raising money, we're getting new equipment. What this young man has done in our little fire department is nothing short of outstanding. And for like 15 years it was Mike and I and 1 or 2 other people that came to call after call after call and managed to kind of keep the fire department going. And now, as Mike and I consider retirement, there's going to be a fully functional fire department. They're all in their 30s, they all have young families, they're all staying in Rockport, and we're going to leave the fire department in really great shape. And I don't know how many rural departments can lay claim. It's another thing I say a lot, is we need rural jobs to maintain emergency services for rural communities. Rural communities can't pay for staff. We can't, there's no money for any of it. And if everybody is commuting because there's no work, then you have these satellite communities that have no services at all. And so it's another one of those,
which is why new people don't want to move out to rural communities.
Right. And it's one of the hidden costs of the industrialization of our food supply and everything that sustains us. And, nobody assigns a cost to the fact that rural communities are losing their schools, their hospitals, their services for people, which forces more and more people to move to cities. And, maybe you can provide services more cheaply and efficiently if everybody lives in an urban area. But kind of like you said when this conversation started, you know more and more people that are kind of wanting to do a more rural lifestyle. Maybe they don't want to live in the eastern Skagit Valley, but maybe they want to live in a small town where they can know their neighbors, where they can be involved with civic things that contribute so much to quality of life. One of the true costs that never get factored in as we measure efficiencies in food production. Going to a farm as an intern or getting some kind of work on a farm is a great way to do it. I really do, because, you know, a farm like mine, I grow so many different things. They really can get an experience of, okay, how to operate a rototiller and how to operate different equipment, how to do maintenance on stuff. I am still learning to farm. When you do mixed vegetables like this, you're never done learning. There's a million diseases and a million bugs and a million varieties and a million variables, and every year is different. I've got some research scientists coming up tomorrow to look at some disease issues I have. I've got another entomology grad student coming out next week to set some traps because I have some bug problems that I'm not supposed to have, and she's doing her dissertation on this bug problem that I think I have. So, you know, you're never done learning on any, I would say on most kinds of farming. You know, a wheat farmer that is just growing 2 or 3 crops, you know, his learning curve is going to be a lot quicker. The more crops you have, the more complicated it gets. But you know, when I first started farming, it was dairy and forage. And then I moved to small grains and berries. And then I moved to growing potatoes and carrots and parsnips and beets and shipping. And, you know, so it's been a learning curve the whole time. I would say, you know, I kind of jumped in and started my farm, you know, really just after a year of working on the dairy. I wound up inheriting that ½ acre of raspberries as it was being planted. And so I jumped pretty much right in. My husband had some seasonal off-the-farm work, and, you know, we didn't need much money then. Even though we were trying to build, you know, we lived in a very small rustic cabin without power and water for years. We didn't have a mortgage. I got my first computer before I had an indoor toilet.
Not many people can say that.
Not many people can say that. So, you know, we jumped right in, but it wasn't without some support in the way of other TILF members, and I didn't jump in and start with this kind of a scene. I was part of the bigger crew of people at Cascadian Farm, and then starting my own, you know, with just a few crops. And some stuff worked and some stuff didn't. Some stuff worked and most stuff didn't.
So you just had to persevere and try it,
yeah,
and be
you know,
dedicated.
The woman that I started this farm with that bought this piece of property, she was single at the time, and there was no way that the farm was going to support both of us and pay her land too. So she only farmed for 3 years, and I had a husband to support my farming habit. That's why I'm still farming. Having an off-farm job, at least, you know, if it's a couple, is really helpful to get going. The learning curve is so steep and the expenses are so endless. The young couples I know that are trying to raise a family and get farming, certainly some of them have a really hard time. Some of them do better than others. It really depends on who they are and what their market is and what their access to market is and how hard they drive them. Came back and said, yeah, some of the young farmers said they won't work more than 30 hours a week. I've been stewing on that all summer. How do you start farming and only work 30 hours? But to do kind of a whole, CSA, grow 50 different things that you're planting every 2 weeks for 6 months, I don't see that as a part-time job. My mentors and heroes is Lynn Miller, who started the Small Farmers Journal. And he writes, he's thousands of people, tens of thousands of people subscribe to the Small Farmers Journal, and it's all about encouraging people to find their way. And, Lynn is a writer and a painter and, in addition to a farmer and a magazine editor, he does all kinds of stuff, and he can make money off certain enterprises. And he really promotes the, a more rounded, keep all your passions alive. See what you can turn into income producing. And I think there's a huge amount of wisdom in that. You don't want to put too much of your life off for too long. And some stuff could be making you money. And, if you're doing a little bit, a big home garden and raising a few cows and, you find your, it's like you can do stuff part-time and add to your income and build a resiliency of community and not do a full-time vegetable scene. You could have a few goats and make cheese and trade that cheese with the neighbors for vegetables. Talking to one of the largest farmers in Skagit Valley, and he just looked at me and goes, "You need a tractor?" I said, "Yeah." He was here the next morning with a tractor.
Wow.
They have 40, 50, 60 tractors. And he just said, we're helping Ann get all of her field work done and her farm put away for the winter. And it was like, no, you can't give me any money for it. Well, he has a lifetime supply of my carrots, which he really loves. And this is, third, fourth generation Skagit Valley farm. Hundreds and hundreds of acres, maybe thousands of acres. And there was no questions asked. He's not an organic farmer, but I'm a farmer, and he knows how hard I work. And, he was here the next day with, a tractor worth $35,000, no questions asked, call me when you're done. So one of the things I have found is that farmers understand each other.